Yes, Robin will let you know when the time's up.
Social justice or woke ideology, and I'm here today to speak about the problematic mural that was painted by Forbes Middle School students at the behest of the Arts and Culture Board of Georgetown. First, a little about my old belief system and why it's related. Social justice or woke ideology is a mutated form of Marxism that centers identity and power rather than class and wealth. Whereas the Marxism of the early 20th century pushed the idea that the best way to look at the world was as a struggle between class groups for wealth, this mutated form of Marxism pushes the idea that the best way to look at the world is as a struggle between identity groups for power. People who subscribe to the social justice faith or cult, and I do call it a cult, having spent 20 years in it, obsessively divide the world into identity groups based on race, sex, sexuality, size, etc., and then label all of these groups as either oppressor or oppressed, just like Marxists did, or as privileged or marginalized. I was indoctrinated into this belief system over 20 years ago at Duke University, and in it I learned to judge people not as individuals, not by the content of their character, not by their behavior or the merit of their ideas. No, I learned to judge and treat people differently on the basis of their race, their sex, their sexuality, their size, and more. Looking back, I was fortunate that I didn't encounter this cult of belief until college, as today it has spread to all of our public institutions, our political parties, our entertainment, our media, our corporations, some of our churches, and yes, to our public schools, K through 12, even here in Georgetown. How does all of this relate to the Be Your Own Person mural disturbingly painted by middle schoolers? This mural, for any who aren't familiar, includes the pansexual, the lesbian, the transgender, the non-binary, and the bisexual flags. It is gender ideology propaganda for a belief system that tells us we must put people into such sexual groups, make these groups their identity, and then judge and treat them differently based on their group status. There are two immediate issues with such a mural. First, it is inappropriate for a public mural to contain ideological messaging at the behest of the Arts and Culture Board, which is taxpayer funded. I am looking to the City Council here to develop clear guidelines and procedures for approval of all publicly funded art going forward. But secondly, and most importantly of immediate concern, is the question of who specifically at Forbes Middle School and Georgetown ISD felt it was appropriate to instruct 10 to 13-year-olds to paint the pansexual, lesbian, transgender, non-binary, and bisexual flags. Are 10-year-olds capable of understanding and consenting to sexual and ideological indoctrination? Were their parents informed of the sexual symbology in the mural and asked if they consent? Grooming is the deliberate act of bringing a child into a sexual, political, or racial ideology, practice, cult, or lifestyle without the knowledge or consent of his or her parent, for the aim of isolating them from their family so the external party can abuse and manipulate them. It is absolutely grooming for the government to sexually indoctrinate children in public schools and to use and exploit those children to paint ideological, sexualized symbology on our town square. Forbes Middle School and Georgetown ISD should be ashamed of themselves. The Arts and Culture Board of Georgetown has some explaining to do as well. Government employee Amanda Still stood here and insulted our intelligence and said these very specific flags were up for interpretation, implying that a reasonable person might believe that a random assortment of colors just so happened to align in these 7 specific symbols. Laura Sewell outright contradicted Ms. Still and claimed these flags for LGBT people in Georgetown. At least Sewell had the guts to admit what these symbols mean. What Sewell didn't have the guts to do was to provide any defense whatsoever for a government middle school using children to paint such symbols. Instead, she said she came here to call out council members for hatred and to speak for LGBT people. Well, I'm here to call you out, Ms. Sewell. You don't speak for gay people. You don't speak for trans people. If you don't know any gay or trans people who disagree with grooming children, then I'd suggest you diversify your social circle. As it is, you speak only for yourself and for others who want to defend grooming children in our public schools. The church on the square was evicted from our meeting place at the Palace Theater following my pastor, Bradley Helgerson, and 2 mothers from our church speaking out against this grooming mural. That's okay, we don't need a building to meet. All you've done, those who work in the shadows to obscure evil, is to push us out into the light of day for all to bear witness. Donna Bogart has stated that my pastor and his ilk should be run out of town with torches and pitchforks. Oh no, that's my time. Okay. I'm well aware of those throughout history who would use torches and pitchforks to oppress, silence, and terrorize people and force their will on others. I don't recall them ever being on the right side of history. The silent majority in Georgetown is becoming more vocal. We are liberals and conservatives, people of faith and atheists, united against an illiberal, racist, collectivist, and yes, evil ideology that threatens the most vulnerable among us, the children of Georgetown. We intend to cut this social justice cancer out of Georgetown by the root, and that starts in our public schools. I urge all concerned parents to start attending school board meetings and to ask Forbes Middle School and Georgetown ISD to take responsibility for this grooming mural and to disclose what else they are forcing onto children in our public schools. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, we have Kate Pamplin. Folks, I'm going to ask you to, this is a public meeting. It's not in a sports arena. So, Ms. Pamplin, is Ms. Pamplin present? Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to our statutory consent agenda.